Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here and for coming in out from this beautiful afternoon to talk about bullying and the internet. I'm a documentary filmmaker and the co-creator, producer, writer of the documentary film Bully that came out from the Weinstein Company a few years ago. And one of the things that we did in Bully is we followed 5 kids and families through what we refer to as a year in the life of bullying in the United States. So we met and filmed with dozens and dozens of families. In the end, 5 were in the film. But we were inside schools, we were inside homes, we were in communities, and we got to see something that I think everybody has known has existed in our schools and communities basically, forever. Something that people said to us all the time was, bullying is a rite of passage. You're never going to do anything about it. Why bother even trying to confront something that is just normal? And I think that one of the things that we really wanted to challenge with the film was this idea that bullying was a normal part of adolescence, that this is a normal rite of passage. And so in being able to film with kids who let us into their lives and let us see these really intimate moments in riding on school buses and witnessing how administrators don't necessarily know what to do, we ended up creating this film, and not only a film, but a movement called the Bully Project that has engaged millions of youth. And as a result of this, the film and the project, something that we were able to see over the past few years is a shift in what young people consider to be normal, in the expectations of what they're going to find when they get to middle school, when they get to high school. So through the process of making the film, I think I've come to have maybe an unusual amount of optimism in our abilities to change what we accept as normal and our expectations in how we treat each other. And I think that that can be communicated and translated to what happens online. So I'm excited for this conversation.
My name is Nika Noor. Excuse my voice. I went out late last night and crushed it. So go South by. I currently work for the Entertainment Software Association. I'm only 2 months into the job. I run their government affairs efforts, and we produce E3, the largest video game trade show in the United States. Before then, I was at the Internet Association, where I was a big proponent and the communications focus for net neutrality and advocating for the tubes. Before that, I was over on Capitol Hill trying to get those fun old white guys to understand why internet and game culture was important and why they should incorporate internet in their advocacy efforts to constituency and public policy. So I come in this with a big background because I spent my entire childhood playing games. My parents are fun Persian Iranian immigrants that didn't believe in a television. So as soon as we got the internet, I played lots and lots of multiplayer platforms and ran a lot of forums. They thought I was doing homework, so that's pretty much it. And I'll be looking at this effort with a public policy focus.
Hi, my name is Emma Alonzo. I'm the director of the Free Expression Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is a nonprofit public interest organization based in Washington, D.C. that deals with internet policy and digital rights. And I'm coming at this topic from a perspective of looking at how internet policy, particularly around how kids and minors use the internet, for over the past 20 years, questions around how kids use the internet have really driven a lot of different kind of waves of internet policy efforts. When the commercial web first started in the mid-90s, we saw a lot of federal laws proposed and passed and then struck down by the Supreme Court around trying to restrict minors' access to pornography or indecent content online. There was a big concern about the fact that pornography was online, kids were also online, and those two might meet. There were laws like the Communications Decency Act, the majority of which was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1997. That was followed by the Child Online Protection Act, which eventually got struck down by the Supreme Court after 10 years of litigation. There's the Children's Internet Protection Act, which requires libraries and schools to install filters to keep kids away from indecent material. So that was a big wave of kind of focus on sort of a panic around how do children and minors use the internet. We've also seen concerns around children's privacy. We have the federal law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is the reason, if you ever look at terms of service, that basically every major website says that kids under 13 aren't allowed on that site. It's because they don't want to have to comply with the requirements of COPPA for dealing with young kids' data. And so as we've sort of seen these various federal efforts around kind of treating minors differently, treating the way that they use the internet differently, we've learned some key lessons, that it's really, really difficult to come up with a federal law that's basically framed around restricting access to information or keeping minors and the kind of speech that they can make online and the information they can receive. It's hard to write one of those that complies with the First Amendment. And that really the strategies that are most successful involve ensuring that parents and children themselves are more empowered, that they have information about the tools and the technologies that are available to them, that different parents, different kinds of families can set content filters the way that's right for their family based on what they think is appropriate and inappropriate for kids. And a huge component of media literacy, of really just making sure that having young people understand kind of the whole sphere of everything from critical thinking and being skeptical of the sources of information that you're seeing online, to thinking about responsibility and kind of the consequences of their own actions online, really ends up in a much more effective place than kind of top-down federal law and regulation.
I'm Rosalind, and I have the incredible privilege of getting to argue with teenagers pretty much all day long. Every day they come to my work if I'm not speaking or teaching somewhere, and they tell me why I'm wrong, what I'm not getting, or maybe a little bit of what I'm getting right. And so I write books and I write curricula and I teach young people, but it is always informed by young people telling me what their lives are like. Because I believe that we have a crisis of credibility that we traditionally have with adults, that young people think that adults don't have any credibility, but I think that this issue in particular really highlights that young people are right to not take adults seriously. And one of the reasons why is because adults are highly anxious about technology and about young people and their privacy and giving control to young people, and in particular about how young people express their sexuality, which is often online. So what I do is I teach, and I am a bridge between parents, teachers, administrators, and young people. For better and for worse, I'm known as the Mean Girls woman, because my book, Queen Bees and Wannabes, was based, I'm the Mean Girls person. But I think that that's really, and that the way in which that got commodified and the way in which that continues online to be used is, in youth culture and overall, is interesting. So what I bring today is a thought about how we can continue and have conversations with young people where they want to engage with us in meaningful ways about a conversation that they usually think, when adults talk to them about bullying and social aggression and their social lives, that we are lecturing to them, that we do not listen to them, that we want to control everything that they are doing, and yet we do not take the time to actually learn about their lives so that we can talk to them in any way that makes any kind of sense. So that's the lens with which I bring to these issues today. So what we'd like to do is, I said we were going to do this by topic, and I actually thought maybe, Nika, when you were talking, or can we start with you about youth? Because I certainly, I mean, I've been teaching for 20 years, and her comment about her online life as a young person gave her entree. It was an incredibly important part of your connection to people. I think that might be a really good way to begin.
Yeah, I've got a deeply personal story that South by caught wind of, and I'm willing to share. It's just that, I grew up in a community that didn't have a lot of ethnic culture, and people didn't really understand what it meant to be Persian or what it meant to be Muslim. And I'm a Persian Muslim, and there was this scenario that happened called 9/11, and where my peers and my colleagues are like 12. They didn't understand how to kind of take that. And so when they were learning about the religion and the culture and the context, their parents would use my family as an example. So I would start going to school, and my whole life changed. I went from, having some friends, not that many, to, having a relatively normal life, playing outside, to then going to the Boys and Girls Club and having my peers refer to me as a terrorist. And meanwhile, you're 12, you don't have logic. You can't be like, I'm not a terrorist, I play Pokemon just like you. I'm watching the WB, I collect the cards, and there's no negotiations. It's just, this is who you are, this is what you are. And so it wasn't until my parents got an internet connection, I went wild. They got it because I needed it for homework. I was playing games. I was on RuneScape. I was on miniplayer.com. I was on every Facebook app and engagement. And I learned that my community, my world wasn't normal, that there were people beyond this 3-block radius where I went to school, went home, ate food, that the universe was not always filled with hate, that there were understanding people. So I went online with this alias, and I made a ton of friends. I went from constantly, physically, personally bullied every day to having an entire community that really supported who I was as a person. I think they really supported my skills, not really me. I was really, really good at leading the guild, but it really shaped my social structure. So if I didn't have the internet, if I didn't have games, I'm really curious as to how I would have turned out if I didn't have that connection to a world outside of my 1-mile radius at home.
Well, I think one thing that's really interesting about how kids' use of the internet today is being affected by the adults in their lives is looking at so much of the focus around bullying is about what happens in schools. And I think school administrators are under a lot of pressure to be doing something about bullying, and they're under pressure from parents, from students themselves. And you see more and more school districts turning toward programs that are aimed at actually kind of tracking and monitoring what the student body is doing online. And how exactly these companies are doing this is still, it's not clear exactly what it is that they're selling, but they claim to be kind of keeping track of all social media engagement and being able to monitor and identify not just instances of bullying, but even truancy. Alerting schools to potential suicide ideation in some of their students. So they're sort of sold as this, we will monitor your student body, what they're saying and doing online for you, so that the school can then intervene. And this is a really challenging question from a policy level on a couple of different rounds. I mean, one, it's just sort of kind of inculcating students in habituating them to being surveilled at all times and having kind of an administrator available to look over all of what they're saying and doing. It's not clear that it's really effective, but there's also the underlying First Amendment question of is this even appropriate for school officials to be doing? Because, of course, school officials in public schools are government actors, and so they need to be respecting the First Amendment rights of students. And it's still something of an open question in the law about how students' online behavior that happens off of the school campus can even be regulated. Can school administrators actually punish a student for something that they say online but off campus? Because, it used to be if students were, calling each other names in the Burger King parking lot, not on the school parking lot, the school official didn't really have any say over that, unless there was some sort of on-campus effectiveness. So we're starting to see this real kind of bleeding of lines around, where, if anywhere, do students have private spaces or have spaces that aren't kind of under the view of school officials. And I bring this up because I think it really ties into what is so, I don't know, heartwarming to me about Nika's story, that we need to kind of remember that the whole goal of trying to do something about bullying, trying to keep kids safe online, it's not to keep them in a bubble. It's not to keep them kind of shielded from everything forever. It's to give them the skills and the opportunities to have the kinds of experiences that you did. Because I'm sure like not everything that happened to you online was rosy. There probably had some interactions that were maybe, I don't know.
Not
let
every
you
interaction.
characterize your own story, but I mean, I think most people have realized that as positive as you might have an experience, part of growing up is like learning how to deal with adversity, learning how to deal with disagreements with people or anything else, but that the access to that much broader community, that ability to share your ideas and actually see them resonate with other people, that is so important to make sure that kids today, still get that opportunity and don't have that kind of suppressed or just sort of controlled out of them by parents who are very concerned or school administrators who are just so sensitized and nervous, as Rosalind was saying, about what might be happening.
Cynthia?
Yeah, I think also speaking to the experiences that you had, Nika, that there are these amazing opportunities to find really great communities online, and that those communities probably, in your experience, were somewhat sort of like determining their own kind of ways that people were interacting with each other and kind of how people were speaking to each other, and it was a place where you found a lot of support and friendship. And on the flip side, when you went into school, you didn't feel safe. Something that we saw a lot with the making of the film and afterwards in speaking with educators and young people and families is that you can kind of tell when and this was the case, I don't know if many people in the room have seen the film, but there's a very kind of a principal who really fails to lead in their school. And when you walk into that school, you knew that the people at the top did not prioritize student safety, and bullying was not something that they wanted to deal with because the adults in the school were bullying each other. The principal was bullying the teachers, and the school guidance counselor felt totally intimidated, and blah blah blah. And the kids in the school where they had a bad bullying problem in that school because the kids looked at what was happening among the adults and they knew, they could feel it. They knew that there were hierarchies among the adults. They knew that the bus drivers were never included in any of the staff meetings. So if something happened on the bus, it was never going to get back to the principal. And so it's no surprise that in places where the adults default to harassment, intimidation, and abusing their power, that young people see that and know this behavior is being condoned in some way in this environment. And I think that there's a similar opportunity online for us as adults. And unfortunately, I think we see a lot of the opposite of this online. But young people are kind of joining us in these spaces where often the discourse is harassing, is intimidating, is shaming, and they see that. And so I think this is something that Rosalind is going to speak to more extensively, but sort of that hypocrisy is not lost. And yet, in the spaces that you found, the young people had taken it upon themselves to be good leaders, good digital citizens, more than not.
The way I'd like to, for you all to think about it is as a series of questions. So for me, working in schools day in and day out, it is true that in almost all private schools now, I haven't seen one that hasn't had it, you have a contract that you sign to be a member of the community where you must comport yourself in certain ways, and you may not harass people. There's all different kinds of ways, and that includes online, and it includes when you're outside of the school property, and it includes any time when you're representing the school. So there are important reasons why we need to be able to have social, informal and formal social contracts for young people to learn their rights and responsibilities as a member of a school community. It is also true, as Emma talked about, that I don't know about you all, but I probably get every day almost, I get hit up to know about some kind of tracking device that people want to put on their children. And there's an assumption, because I'm supposed to be a parenting expert, that I will endorse this tool. And a colleague of mine said to me, it's amazing because if you read anything that you write, you would know that you would not ever endorse that I would never want to endorse any of these tracking devices. Tracking devices are based on anxiety. They're based on not being able, that as a parent you feel that that you need to keep your child safe, that you have to be able to have as much information as possible and as much control over your child as possible. And what we forget, and it's one of the things I really want us to think about in the messiness of this issue, is that what we lose time and time again is the relationship that the child has with the adult. I don't care if it's the authority figure from the school or if it's the parent. It's that if we are coming across trying to constantly control them, first of all, really got to figure out who is more incentivized to figure out the system, right, to their benefit. A child who feels that they are being controlled, or an adult who sort of understands the technology enough to buy a program from somebody and then sort of maybe install it, probably not correctly, and then forget about it. And then you've got a 13-year-old who is highly incentivized, like driven incentivized, to figure out a way to totally game that system and break the system. So it is on steroids the issue of the 7th grader who, anybody who goes into schools knows this, that when you go into a school, a 7th grader who knows how to get around the firewalls a couple of years ago, because a lot of schools have now just given up, that person loved to tell you how to get around the firewalls. Right? I walk into the school and they'd be like, you can get around. I was like, can I use YouTube? No. Can I use Facebook? No. Don't worry about it. I'll show you how to do it. Right? And that person was 12. So we have to, and this is the question I want us to think about, is that at base, this is about adults and their relationships with young people. And if we come across as being filled with anxiety and filled with reactivity, then the relationship is going to sever. And then when they have problems, bullying, being in a conflict, or having an abuse of power online or in their real life, or the interaction of the two, which of course is usually what's happening, they will not come talk to us. If we are constantly trying to control them and we are constantly trying to track them, and we don't take the time and effort to build a relationship of mutual respect and trust, they will not come to us for help when it is necessary. So what you have, I think, is either kids who are so anxious that they come and talk to you about every single thing, and every single thing becomes bullying, like not being included in an Instagram post has become like a bullying problem. That is not a bullying problem. That's a hurtful problem, right? It's a problem, it hurts your feelings, but it is not necessarily a bullying issue. And one of the reasons why we have teachers and principals who are throwing up their hands is because we've got parents who are going to them every time their kid doesn't get into an Instagram post, or enough parents that people just disengage. So we also have to be really clear about what bullying is and what it's not. And so what we've got is kids who either are going all the time saying that they're being bullied, or kids, and this is the vast majority of kids, who say, I'm never talking to an adult, because if I talk to an adult, it's going to make it worse. And they really have some really good reasons for thinking that way. So I want us to think about it as a series of questions of what am I doing and how am I contributing to these issues in a way, with whatever capacity you work with young people or have young people in your life, that contributes to the relationship being built instead of a relationship that gets fractured. So anybody else want to add to this topic before we move on?
The only thing I will say, in regards to the tracking and trying to control your kid, I will say there is one small positive. I had that experience where my parents they found out what I was doing online, which was not homework. So they would take the internet box and they would put it in a cabinet. I figured out how to lock into the cabinet. They would sleep with it under their pillow. I learned how to hack my neighbor's Wi-Fi. They found out and blocked it, so I went 2 doors down and was able to rewire their entire server just so that I could get more bandwidth to play RuneScape.
Did they know you'd rewired their server?
Do they know right now?
I hope they're not watching. Oh my God. Oh man. So I agree with you. The only thing is, it would be interesting to see if maybe relieving this adult anxiety and controlling their kids would actually be, if there is a way to utilize this experience to give parents less anxiety, but create fun obstacles, because out of this experience, I started learning how to code. I was hacking firewalls. At my last job, I built my own computer, all as a result of this really interesting cat and mouse dynamic between my immigrant parents that didn't really understand what I was doing online and me really not wanting to do my homework. And that whole experience really got me into STEM education. It got me into science. It got me into math, because I only paid attention in class just so that I could game better at home. That was my only direct link. So it would be interesting if we can take this culture and actually produce like a really great product out of it. Instead of tracking your kids, fine, put obstacles in their way, but do it so that they're solving a problem. Do it, I mean, if their incentive is to do something fun, then why not make them work for it? I mean, it's just one angle that we can kind of reduce anxiety without controlling the kids, the youths. The youth.
Cynthia, do you have something? I can't see your head, so I just want to make sure I'm not sure. Okay, good. Do you have something you would like to add?
We can move on.
Okay. So one of the things that I really work on, I don't know about you all, but one of the intersections of these issues is with how do we reach out to them? How do we work with them? And I'm going to give you one of the things that I'm very challenged by, and we'll talk about that sort of subject for a few minutes. And this, to me, is also very much about the intersection of our real relationships, sexuality, technology, and how we express ourselves online for young people. So I work with a lot of high schools, and I never, ever would have thought that I would have had the regular opportunity to be asked by high schools now, because there's a feeling amongst educators that what young people are doing online is incredibly superficial. Now, we don't usually compare, we usually sort of label what young people do online as being very superficial, yet we don't think about what we do online as being particularly superficial, right? So parents posting a picture of like their latest vacation is super meaningful, and what a kid did at a party is not, that's superficial. But in fact, actually, they're sort of the same. Does that make sense? So, but in the work that I do in high schools, I'm now being regularly asked to talk to young people about hooking up culture and about how they are expressing themselves online, because there's a lot of concern and anxiety about the way in which young people, because they don't care anymore, they don't sort of feel a sense of respect for their bodies, that they put themselves out there online and then they get bullied for it. And it's a complicated issue. The reason I'm raising it is because I think that it brings together a lot of the things that we struggle with. Relentless advances in technology, young people's development, physical development, emotional development, their sexual development, and how they express themselves online. And then, with the other part of that is that sometimes that gets exploited, and sometimes that gets really used, and people get really hurt, and people's entertainment becomes somebody else's, is someone's humiliation. And that, for me, is the big issue when I'm working with teenagers, is that we live in a culture that is constantly paralleling someone's entertainment is someone else's embarrassment and humiliation. So when we talk about young people have the right to express themselves, and we don't really, we're thinking about that, and that's a pretty mushy kind of situation, but how they're expressing themselves is important. They're living in a world where some people are going to exploit that, and as young people, I mean, all of us should be able to make mistakes, but young people developmentally need to make mistakes, whatever those mistakes, or just have these growth opportunities that are difficult that Emma was talking about. So within that is really moments of aggression and bullying can really occur. So I see that in terms of schools wanting me to come in and talking to young people about their sexual relationships and about hooking up and however people define that, and then also how that's exploited. So one of that's the way I'm looking at it. And I wanted to ask the rest of you sort of how you're looking at it or how you've seen it and how maybe you can, the questions that you're thinking about that can spark questions for the audience as well.
Well, I can say one of the most sort of frustrating things that I've seen around the whole question of sexting and of young people especially, sharing intimate images of themselves online is when you have, if people engaged in this are under the age of 18, unfortunately, it's not uncommon for sometimes both the person who's taken that image and the person that they've shared it to end up being prosecuted under production of child pornography laws, which to me is just one of the best kind of crystallization of how our legal system is really not cut out to deal with this, and trying to apply something like, very, very reasonable law prohibiting the production of child pornography is trying to address situations and circumstances that are just so far apart from what's happening when a 16-year-old is taking a photo of herself to share with her boyfriend, and then that either just stays between the two of them and a parent finds out and is upset, or it gets shared out among more people in the school and becomes an issue where law enforcement gets brought in. That kind of response of trying to treat the 16-year-olds involved in that as child pornographers is just so far away from, I think, where we actually need to get, which is, as Rosalind is saying, is around difficult discussions of young people and their sexuality. And we're in a country where we can't even get truthful information to kids in sex ed classes all the time, let alone discussions about when and how and if it's ever okay to be sexting as a 16-year-old. So I think it comes back to, this is not something where law can kind of come in and fix the problem or provide the nuanced solution we need. It's so much more coming, from the ground level, coming in at the, how are we educating kids, how are we talking with kids about their bodies, what they choose to do with their bodies, and who they choose to, share that information with.
Well, I mean, you guys are touching base on how, people are using shame and harassment as forms of entertainment. Well, I mean, look at our culture, look at our society. We, as a society, our entertainment is, and I'm guilty of it, the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Our entertainment is, watching each other discuss and talk about, top-level, very physical issues, but look at other countries and look at what they're prioritizing. In India, you've got, they have this standardized test where the kids who score the best end up with a great giant poster up on the freeway congratulating them for scoring well on their exams. Where's the, real life of Sheryl Sandberg and Marissa Mayer crushing it as CEO? Where is the, cool podcast talking about, all the top gamers and their lives and, the fact that they're physicists and scientists and musicians and artists? This is a result of what happens when you're literally watching what other adults are doing and the kids replicating that. The difference here is that it's romanticized and become an issue because younger people are utilizing different tools. Otherwise, the topic and the discussion hasn't changed from what it is today is still what it was 20 years ago. The difference is we have more ways to go through it. It's not about solving a problem. It's more about how do we reprioritize, how do we lift up people from, with different barriers and really start idolizing the brilliant talent that we have today in our U.S. economy versus, again, and trust me, I love my Bravo TV. I'm with you guys. I'm guilty of it too. But where is the trending Facebook post about how, this awesome kid just crushed a science fair versus I roll, Kim Kardashian broke the internet again? It's just, we gotta redo our subject lines here.
So, I think that one part of the conversation is that young people are coming of age and discovering their sexuality, and it's happening online. And as adults, we're like, how do we deal with sex and whatever, And I think that's one part of the conversation, and educating young people about being sexual and where that intersects with the internet in a safe way is important in a way that can protect their privacy or their identity, but that also allows them to express themselves and their sexuality is one thing. And we're talking about consensual, right? Like in the context of a relationship where a teenager is deciding to take a photograph of him or herself and share it with a trusted person. I think what happens so frequently, however, is that picture becomes currency. And that picture, once the relationship is ended or it gets into the hands of somebody else who it wasn't intended for, or for whatever reason, people know that these images contain a lot of power to harm. Why? Because shame is really, really powerful in our culture, particularly the shame of young women whose bodies are used against them, and the images of their bodies that are used against them. And so it's not just a matter of, do you take a picture, do you not take a picture? Those pictures exist. But why do they have currency? And I think that this is a really deep issue in our culture, that women's bodies, women's privacies can be used as, women's privacy can be violated, and women's own bodies can be used as weapons against them in a way that does not work for generally men or young men. And to shift that, I think, is going to take a lot of work. Because it's not just what happens in high schools. This is kind of at the core of our culture. And so there's a lot of work there.
Well, so we're going to move then to what can we do, and also think about your questions and your thoughts. And when I'm talking to adults, one of the things that we've got to, that as Cynthia is saying, is we have a lot of work to do, but at the same time, I think that that in my experience, and you all can speak to it, obviously, to it as well, that when we have very straightforward conversations with young people, and we don't make adults feel like they're incompetent, because there's this feeling of adults don't want to admit how incompetent they feel with all of this. So if we could admit that, but if we talk to young people directly, I think one of the things that we need to, here are some of the things that I think about when I'm talking to adults. We have to have the conversation stop, completely stop, about screen time and about addiction. The way in which we talk to young people is about, you are addicted to the screens, meanwhile the adult is doing the same thing as the kid is, and sort of violent content, right? So we have to think about how we are talking to young people about these issues. One of the things that I've been thinking about as an educator, because I write curricula a lot, is, and this is from the earlier mornings, listening to the panels this morning, was really getting very concrete about how we can talk to young people in educational settings, whatever that setting is, about having them understand the difference between privacy, or having the robust, really interesting debate about privacy versus free expression and free speech. And we know that young people, just like Nika with her, was she trying to figure out so much in school? She was engaged in school because she actually had an application for her outside life. That is actually what the goal of school is. The goal of school is to find something you're curious about, to not have a guarantee of success, but a hope of success. She didn't have a guarantee that she was going to figure out how to get into that other person's server, but she thought she had a hope of doing it if she could figure it out, right? You have social engagement, you're curious. That's what schools should be. It should not be about frankly, it should not be about like anti-bullying banners, honestly. So what I think is, as a concrete thing, is if we actually, kids have social studies classes, they have civics classes. Those things usually, they sit there and they have no way of figuring out how this applies to their real life. And I know that a teacher is going to say, I have to teach to the test. That's actually, I mean, all due respect to teachers and the stuff that they have, I get it, but I also work in education. That is an excuse. It is oftentimes an excuse to not figure out how to talk to kids in ways that are going to mean something to them. So we've got this incredible opportunity here of an educational experience that young people really care about and they can relate to on a day-to-day basis, which is, let's debate in our civics class or in our social studies class or in our American government classes or American history classes. Let's bring it to what you're dealing with right now, privacy versus free expression. It is, and what do you think about it? Take sides, have a debate, talk about this in school. You know, lots of times as a parent, you have to like come back to PTA meetings, and there are like some stuff that you got to listen to, but a lot of stuff is like, are you kidding me, right? Like I've gotten this in an email. Wouldn't it be really cool if you could go to a debate to listen to young people talk about these issues in ways that would be impressive, like, wow, my kid knows something about this, and we're all learning about it, and everybody's anxiety goes down because we're all being educated about it. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, having been here today, is just about how to take this into more realistic ways into a school setting. But I think we have to be honest about the way in which we talk to young people, and so I want to ask you all about that as well.
Well, I think one of the best pieces of advice I've heard about, how adults can talk to kids about technology is kind of goes to Ralston's point of, parents especially being, anxious about maybe not getting the technology, not understanding it. Be honest about that, right? Don't have it just be kind of a lecture and a here's what you should be doing, or avoiding the topic because you're not really sure what Snapchat is. Talk to the expert you have in your house about what Snapchat is. Get them, try to engage kids in what they do understand, which is the technology they're using, how they're using it, the cool little workarounds they found to get around this or that filter or setting, and the context that they're in. What is going on in their schools, what's going on in their friend groups, how is that all playing out? Because they will have more knowledge, more background, more expertise in that. But that doesn't mean that adults have nothing to bring to the conversation. They've got many more years of experience. They know about long-term relationship management and how to deal with confrontation, hopefully. And there's a lot that can be brought into that conversation, but having it more as a conversation, not as just somebody handing down wisdom from on high, while also getting the technology behind it completely wrong and just kind of undermining their own contributions. So I think it's really having everybody sort of admit what they do and don't know, and bringing all of that together in a conversation to help give kids, more tools and more ability to navigate technology.
I'm so sorry, Emma. I disagree with you on a couple points. Only because, man, so my sisters are Gen Z. My parents had them a lot later, and they are sneaky. When they know what my parents don't know, they weaponize it. It's
They
like,
weaponize it?
Oh, yeah. Well, Mom and Dad doesn't know this about Facebook, so I can put it here, and then I can text so-and-so about something, and then I'll sneak out and go to the beach, even though I'm supposed to be at the library. That is their thought process.
Again, you do know this is being recorded, right? So you're throwing
Yeah, I
your
hope they're
sisters
not.
under the bus.
Oh, man.
Sisters so busted.
I know, my sisters are busted. This will be really interesting next weekend. It's fun, but no, seriously, I mean, I remember I weaponized what my parents didn't know, and I used it to be sneaky. Now, if we're going to talk about how we get adults to kind of fill that gap with adults and kids and technology, I encourage finding a way to make it a family activity, finding a way to make it a game. When you go on vacation, take pictures of each other. Say you want to put it on Instagram, make it a moment, make it an activity. But if you sit down and if you tell like a Gen Z or any fun little teeny bopper, if you tell them, hey, I don't know how Twitter works, but I want to be honest with you, they'll be like, great, I can have conversations with my friends on Twitter and nobody will know. Like, Mom, so you.
But is that any different from the situation of the parent not being honest about that and the kid having, conversations on Twitter that
I mean,
they
look,
don't know.
as we talk about the adults and the youths, adults have Google. Right? If you don't know something, Google it. I'm just saying, you're right. There should be more resources for parents to learn about technology, but I encourage parents to find a way to make social media, to make technology, to make games, to make e-learning a household activity. Same as you do when you want, if you want, back when my grandma and I were making dinner, she learned that I didn't know how to cook at all because it was a whole thing. It's fine. But so she made cooking an activity. That's how I learned recipes. So just like today, we have to make social media a home activity, taking photos together, tweeting together, watching live streams together. And how you get there, I don't know, but I don't know. I don't really encourage telling teeny boppers what you don't know because I think they'll use it against you. Sorry.
Cynthia.
I think in sort of looking at solutions, something again, just to kind of keep the running metaphor, in physical bullying, the places where bullying takes place are no surprise to anybody, even though adults in the schools or wherever may be like, oh my goodness, we're shocked, somebody had this horrible thing happen to them on the bus or in the bathroom or, at the playground after school. It's like, well, yeah, of course that happened because there are no adults there and everybody knows it. So I think that will always be the case, that there are always going to be many, many, many places, more than we can be, that adults aren't going to be, and that kids seek those places out because those are places where they can experiment and they can take risks and they can, in some cases, behave in ways that maybe we wish they didn't. Maybe they can assert themselves in ways they may be afraid of. There's a reason why young people kind of are always seeking out places where they can kind of be alone with each other. And yes, those are places where offline we found, bullying often takes place in those places, but also it's a place where if we give young people the opportunity to lead or to know how to respond when things happen in those places, that we're not always going to be able to put out this fire there, be like, oh good, we stopped bullying on that platform, whew, we're good to go now. No, of course not. It's gonna spring up over here and over there, and so I think instead of having that approach of how do we get rid of it on this platform, that platform, and that platform, yes, that is part of it, is addressing how can platforms be safer, is also giving young people the tools to say, I can be a better leader in these areas, or I can ask for help if I don't know what to do. And I can expect that bullying doesn't have to be the norm. Shame, non-consensual pornography doesn't have to be the norm when I'm online in these spaces for my community, that there's other ways that it can be. And I think that if we can start to show young people that more ourselves, that I think things can change.
So we're going to open it up to questions and comments and concerns. So if you have them, you can see the mic that's right in the middle of the room. Anyone? While the person's going up, I wanted to ask you all, or didn't want to forget, is there anything that you are doing that is providing the kinds of solutions or opportunities that Cynthia talked about? So just as a thought, right? Okay, yes.
So I have a bunch of teenagers, and I think things are, about 5 years ago, they were really complicated with all this kind of crazy Facebook stuff of people posting on each other's Facebooks. I think almost all that went away with Snapchat. But what I found recently is a lot of overreaching by principals on cell phone usage and Facebook group usage or GroupMe usage. and especially around team sports and activities like that where they feel like they can reach in. And I was just curious, I don't even, like, it hasn't affected my kids, but certainly their friends. So they'll say something stupid in a group chat, like, oh, that kid is such a fill in the blank asshole, blah, 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 blah. And they will get kicked off the team because that's quote unquote bullying. Now, these are all the kids' individual cell phones, so absolutely no privacy there. And I just wondered, like, it seemed like a really complicated issue to me, and my stance was it seemed unfair to those kids. But the school felt like it's a school-sanctioned team, therefore they can get kicked off, and it seemed like you might actually know something about this, so curiosity there.
Well, so I do know a lot. I work with schools a lot on these issues. Public schools are governed by like I'm in Colorado, so CHASA, the Colorado Student Activities Association, but there's a national thing. And they're in charge of putting together policies on these issues. Now, in a public school, you sign an agreement that says, as a member of this team, I agree to the following things. Mm-hmm. Where they really get you is with MIPs, with minor possessions, like a kid is drinking, you know. But
it's like it's dumb photos of them drinking at a party or whatever.
Right. Looking on social networking platforms to see if they're drinking, or to see if, like, right before a game, a coach will say, it's not uncommon for a coach to say, don't do anything stupid. And the kids know exactly what they're talking about. But they have signed, here's the problem for me, they've signed an agreement. I believe strongly, you know, even above sort of the law of, like, the actual law, is that when you sign an agreement and you understand that agreement, if you have taken the time for somebody to explain that agreement to you, and you sign that as being a member of the community, that is what you have agreed to do as a member of that team. So as a parent, and I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, if they break that agreement, they have broken that agreement, and their word is their bond, and they cannot have the privilege of participating if they have gone back on their word. That's, to me, sort of the higher issue here, right? Is your word is your bond, and you may not use the internet to humiliate other people. As a parent, that's what I believe in. And so I'm going to back up the school if it's going to do that. And the private schools have the right to do that as well, if you sign those agreements. So in order to be privileged as a part of that group, you're signing your name on that. And that's something that needs to be,
but it's not on the internet. It's on your phone.
But the rule of the agreement is we have the right to find out what is going on with you, so that to prove that you are comporting yourself. And they're very clear about it. So is there some room to be able to figure this out and do a better job? Absolutely. But it is clear to me.
So you think it's just legalistic that way?
That what?
It's legalistic. Like, you signed the agreement, therefore.
Well, it's
is there any gray area there? Is there?
I want to, like, your word, for me as a parent, your word is your bond. You are a part of this group, so you've agreed to do it. They've said that to be a participant in this group, you have to do this.
Okay, but I just heard you say the opposite thing before, which is kind of like, we should not be out there tracking kids. Isn't that exactly that? And haven't we gone too far in this? So I'll give you an example to expand on this.
I do think that my other panelists want to say something, so I just want to make sure. Nika, I feel that you want to say something.
I just really like faces. No, I mean, sorry, I made a face because you said that, you know, as a parent, your word is your bond, and I've just went through all the bonds I've broken in my past. I mean, look, kids are gonna do dumb things, and there's accountability, and I think there's validity in your question, which is, where is the line? Where do we draw the line on how to make accountability stick and learn lessons and get values? And I agree, that might not be the best way to do it, right? Where is the second chance? Where is the ability for the redemption of souls? And with technology, it's really hard, and it goes to your point that because people don't know how the platform works. So how do you give that teenager who got kicked off a second chance? How do you get him to learn his lesson? that's a challenge we gotta solve, and you're correct.
Well, most schools will let the person come back. They have to do a punishment. I mean, it's not like most schools don't kick the kid off the team. I want to immediately. There has to be a pattern of behavior. But I mean, you want to say something?
I think that kind of what's being highlighted here is this tension around what's actually kind of the reasonable expectation of the student. Right? Do they, in signing onto these agreements, do they think that that means that their entire world is open to inspection and consequences from it? Because I think part of what we're hoping kids will learn in school and in part in signing these sorts of things, what does it mean for your word to be your bond, and how do you kind of understand what it means to commit yourself to a certain set of standards, and then learning about accountability and what are the consequences if you break that. And in order for that all to kind of work out, kids need to know, what are the parameters of all of this. If they don't think that their personal cell phones are going to be inspected by school administrators and then they're surprised by that, then I start getting worried about, are we holding them to completely unrealistic standards, and kind of it can feel like consequences coming in not from, a reasonable, predictable series of events, but just sort of randomly foisted upon them because of the all-seeing eye of the administration.
Right. I just want to make sure that we get your question because our time is running out.
I'm wondering if, like sex education in prior generations, the time has come at the lowest, at elementary levels and beyond, to educate our kids as part of the curriculum rather than denying the power of the internet, but to begin to educate them about the tools and about the foibles and about how they can block and what the consequences are as they grow into maturity and begin to use these tools rather than learning the hard way, which we've all discussed, which amounts to bullying. I wonder what your views are.
Well, the other part is that kids are going into puberty significantly earlier than they have every decade. Young boys and girls are going into puberty about 4 months earlier. So what we have are girls who are beginning puberty, the majority of them at 8 and 9, beginning puberty, and boys are not much more behind than that. So when I'm teaching elementary school teachers and they're saying to me, kids are acting like teenagers, and they're doing things online that are somewhat similar to what we used to see in 6th and 7th grade, there is a reason for that. We are learning so much about brain development and adolescent brain development, but it is absolutely fact that kids are going into puberty earlier. So we have a very interesting confluence of events that makes it absolutely critical for us to be able to educate young people at earlier and earlier ages about these issues.
But not about the issues as much as the technical capability to understand what their behaviors go
Absolutely.
through.
I was going to say, we have to start young, because by the time they're in like 3rd grade, they probably are better at using devices and apps and platforms than we are. So I mean, at some point, they're going to surpass us, and it's going to be when they're pretty young, So I think that the point you're raising is an excellent point, that, beginning really early with digital citizenship, how to be a good digital citizen, should start very, very early.
And in school curricula.
In school, absolutely. Yeah.
Sir, do you have one more question behind you?
Yes.
Okay, let's make sure. So we have one more. Yes.
Just wanted to touch base on the fact of the subject matter in our schools on today. Everything seems to be going towards the standardized testing. Everything is getting away from the individual curriculum. Like when I was in school, health education was about the body. But I believe now, especially when we're talking about technology and what sex means to the youth of today, there has to be a change and an updated in the curriculum, because if we're just teaching the basics what it was back in the day and we're not evolving with the technology and what we're teaching, we're continuing to allow that gap to grow and grow and grow, and then we're finding and we're looking around and we're pointing the finger. We're pointing the finger at the parents. We're pointing the finger at the teachers. We're pointing the finger at society. Who's going to take advantage of this situation? It's like the young lady said before. When do we give accountability to who plays this part, who has the bigger role, and how can we come together as a unit, not only from the parent perspective, but from the teacher's perspective and the curriculum that we have for these young people, and not just when we see them doing something wrong, we want to send them home for a day or suspend them for 3 days. That's just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. I just want to see and hear what you ladies have to say about how can we come together from all angles, because as Ms. Lowen said, it's a lot of work that's going to be done, but everybody wants to turn a blind eye until it happens to one of their children.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, right now I'm working with the Association of Middle Level Educators, the people who are the association for middle school teachers. And I'm working with them to do a curricula that will be out in October that my dream is that it addresses many of these issues that you're talking about. And I would love to talk to you if you're interested about getting more information about that. It's with Corwin Press, AMLE, and me. We're doing a curricula to address these issues and to hopefully, so that there's not so much pressure on the high schools also. So that's one of the things that I'm doing. If anybody has any things they'd like to add.
Sure, yeah. We haven't actually talked that much about the platforms, the social media sites, and the websites where all of this activity is happening. But one thing that we're working on at Center for Democracy and Technology is actually more material explaining even just the basics of, how does content moderation really work on big websites? How do you go from somebody posting a statement that's intending to be harassing or intending to embarrass or humiliate someone to seeing that taken down? What are these processes? How do they really work? Because we find just in so many discussions with whether it's policymakers or the media or parents, there's still just a lot of mystery around some of the very basics of how does putting content online even work.
I was just going to add really quickly that I think it comes down sort of very broadly to culture. And nothing sort of makes me sort of as happy as when I'm on the subway or walking down the street. I live in New York City, in Brooklyn, and hearing kids being like, hey, that's bullying, or like, don't say that, like, that's so mean, and seeing kids sort of having these conversations with each other and these ways of being with each other that sort of showed this shift, I think, that's happened in our culture around bullying to some degree. There's still so much to be done. It's still happening, but I think that some of these things with what's happening online, we don't get online and become different people. We don't have this sort of wall between our offline and online lives. They're completely integrated. And so I think the thing that kind of connects both of those is really culture, and how can we be more respectful and use really sort of better ways to talk to each other, engage each other, and come of age online and offline.
So I have a direct example on how we can collaborate in schools, and I'm so excited about your question because I actually work with the Higher Education Video Game Alliance. And when I feel like 15 years ago when people asked in schools, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? You had I want to be a sports coach, I want to be an actress, doctor, lawyer. And of course, I was like, I want to be Bill Nye the Science Guy. And, the question is, well, how do you get kids who want to be Bill Nye the Science Guy? When you ask kids if you want to be a video game design programmer, how do you take that and how do you develop their education so they can become that? And so with the Higher Education Video Game Alliance, we have learned how to deploy video game design and programs in schools all across the country. And here's why it's amazing. When we go to schools, we had those cliques, right? We had jocks, we had artists, we had the mathletes. With video game design, it requires everyone to collaborate. There is no space for bullying because you have to rely on your peers. If you want to build out, the next cool Grand Theft Auto or the Angry Birds, you need an artist, you need a coder, you need a programmer, you need a project manager, you need a writer, you need a script guy, you need a video editor, and it brings on all these skill sets. And so what you're starting to see is cross-pollination of departments, of different mindsets. God, when I went to school, I wasn't cool, but I would have never hung out with the artists, they were just so fabulous. And I never really got to hang out with the writers because they were so thoughtful. And I was the fat, nerdy kid, so there was no ability and there was no traction because these programs didn't exist. But if we're able to build our talent pipeline here by putting out programs so that we can continue to encourage and educate these guys, this is going to result in jobs. This ability of collaboration will somehow possibly, solve some format of bullying, it'll cause people to work together more in cross departments and formats, and they're going to come out with an extensive amount of skill sets that's going to be really, really employable when they graduate. The problem is, again, the adults, the parents, they don't know how to take that passion, how to encourage that cross-pollination, because again, they're not educated. Okay, my kid wants to learn graphic design. Google how to learn graphic design, right? There's no like actual curriculum. So I agree, we do need a tech upgrade, but there is a marketplace currently building out that upgrade. We just need to rapido that process.
Thank you all very, very much for your time, and I'm sure that they will stay here for a few minutes if you have more questions. Thank you very much.